welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wajenberg. This time we will continue our reading of Lilith by George MacDonald. Our narrator, Mr. Vane, has found himself in a strange world, and he's now making his way in complete ignorance of where to go or what he should do. Chapter 10. The Bad Burrow. As the air grew black and the winter closed swiftly around me, the fluttering fire blazed out more luminous, and arresting its flight, hovered, waiting. So soon as I came under its radiance, it flew slowly on, lingering now and then above spots where the ground was rocky. Every time I looked up, it seemed to have grown larger, and at length gave me an attendant shadow. Plainly a bird butterfly, it flew with a certain swallowy double. Its wings were very large, nearly square, and splashed all the colors of the rainbow. Wondering at their splendor, I became so absorbed in their beauty that I stumbled over a low rock and lay stunned. When I came to myself, the creature was hovering over my head, radiating the whole chord of light, with multitudinous gradations and some kinds of colors I had never seen before. I rose and went on, but unable to take my eyes off the shining thing to look to my steps, I struck my foot against a stone. Fearing then another fall, I sat down to watch the little glory, and a great longing awoke in me to have it in my hand. To my unspeakable delight, it began to sink toward me. Slowly at first, then swiftly it sank, growing larger as it came nearer. I felt as if the treasure of the universe were giving itself to me, put out my hand, and had it. But the instant I took it, its light went out. All was dark as pitch. A dead book with boards outspread lay cold and heavy in my hand. I threw it in the air, only to hear it fall among the heather. Burying my face in my hands, I sat in motionless misery. But the cold grew so bitter that, fearing to be frozen, I got up. The moment I was on my feet, a faint sense of light awoke in me. "Is it coming to life?" I cried, and a great pang of hope shot through me. Alas, no. It was the edge of a moon peering up keen and sharp over a level horizon. She brought me light, but no guidance. She would not hover over me, would not wait on my faltering steps. She could but offer me an ignorant choice. With a full face she rose, and I began to see a little about me. Westward of her, and not far from me, a range of low hills broke the horizon line. I set out for it. But what a night I had to pass ere I reached it. The moon seemed to know something, for she stared at me oddly. Her look was indeed icy cold, but full of interest, or at least curiosity. She was not the same moon I had known on earth. Her face was strange to me, and her light yet stranger. Perhaps it came from an unknown sun. Every time I looked up, I found her staring at me with all her might. At first I was annoyed, as at the rudeness of a fellow creature, but soon I saw or fancied a certain wondering pity in her gaze. Why was I out in her night? Then first I knew what an awful thing it was to be awake in the universe. I was, and could not help it. As I walked, my feet lost the heather and trod a bare, spongy soil, something like dry, powdery peat. To my dismay, it gave a momentary heave under me. Then presently I saw what seemed a ripple of an earthquake running on before me, shadowy in the low moon. It passed into the distance, but while I yet stared after it, a single wave rose up and came slowly toward me. A yard or two away it burst, and from it, with a scramble and a bound, issued an animal like a tiger. About his mouth and ears hung clots of mold, and his eyes winked and flamed as he rushed at me, showing his white teeth in a soundless snarl. I stood fascinated, unconscious of either courage or fear. He turned his head to the ground and plunged into it. "That moon is affecting my brain," I said as I resumed my journey. "What life can be here but the phantasmic, the stuff of which dreams are made? I am indeed walking in a vain show." Then I strove to keep my heart above the waters of fear, nor knew that she whom I distrusted was indeed my defense from the realities I took for phantoms. Her light controlled the monsters, else I had scarce taken a second step on the hideous ground. I will not be appalled at that which only seems, I said to myself, yet felt it a terrible thing to walk on a sea where such fishes disported themselves below. With that, a step or two from me, the head of a worm began to come slowly out of the earth, as big as that of a polar bear, and much resembling it, with a white mane to its red neck. The drawing wriggles with which its huge length extricated itself were horrible, yet I dared not turn my eyes from them. The moment its tail was free, it lay as if exhausted, wallowing in feeble effort to burrow again. Does it live on the dead, I wondered, and is it unable to hurt the living? If they scent their prey and come out, why do they leave me unharmed? I know now it was that the moon paralyzed them. All the night through, as I walked, hideous creatures, no two alike, threatened me. In some of them, beauty of color enhanced loathliness of shape. One large serpent was covered from head to distant tail with feathers of glorious hues. I became at length so accustomed to their hurtless menaces that I fell to beguiling the way with the invention of monstrosities, never suspecting that I owed each moment of life to the staring moon. Though hers was no primal radiance, it so hampered the evil things that I walked in safety. For light is yet light, if but the last of a countless series of reflections. How swiftly would not my feet have carried me over the restless soil, had I known that, if still within their range when her lamp ceased to shine on the cursed spot, I should that moment be at the mercy of such as had no mercy, the center of a writhing heap of hideousness, every individual of it as terrible as before it had but seemed. Full of ignorance, I watched the descent of the weary, solemn, anxious moon down the widening vault above me, with no worse unease than the dread of losing my way, whereas yet I had indeed no way to lose. I was drawing near the hills I had made my goal, and she was not now far above their skyline, when the soundless wallowing ceased, and the burrow lay motionless and bare. Then I saw, slowly walking over the light soil, the form of a woman. A white mist floated about her, now assuming, now losing to reassume the shape of a garment, as it gathered to her or was blown from her by a wind that dogged her steps. She was beautiful, but with such a pride at once and misery on her countenance that I could hardly believe what I yet saw. Up and down she walked, vainly endeavoring to lay hold of the mist and wrap it around her. The eyes in the beautiful face were dead, and on the left side was a dark spot against which she would now and then press her hand, as if to stifle pain or sickness. Her hair hung nearly to her feet, and sometimes the wind would so mix it with the mist that I could not distinguish the one from the other. But when it fell gathering together again, it shone a pale gold in the moonlight. Suddenly pressing both hands on her heart, she fell to the ground, and the mist rose from her and melted in the air. I ran to her, but she began to writhe in such torture that I stood aghast. A moment more, and her legs, hurrying from her body, sped away serpents. From her shoulders fled her arms, as in terror, serpents also. Then something flew up from her like a bat, and when I looked again, she was gone. The ground rose like the sea in a storm. Terror laid hold upon me. I turned to the hills and ran. I was already on the slope of their base when the moon sank behind one of their summits, leaving me in its shadow. Behind me rose a waste and sickening cry, as of frustrate desire, the only sound I had heard since the fall of the dead butterfly. It made my heart shake like a flag in the wind. I turned and saw many dark objects bounding after me, and made for the crest of a ridge on which the moon still shone. She seemed to linger there, that I might see to defend myself. Soon I came in sight of her and climbed the faster. Crossing the shadow of a rock, I heard the creatures panting at my heels. But just as the foremost threw himself upon me with a snarl of greedy hate, we rushed into the moon together. She flashed out an angry light, and he fell from me a bodiless blotch. Strength came to me, and I turned on the rest. But one by one, as they darted into the light, they dropped with a howl, and I saw or fancied a strange smile on the round face above me. I climbed to the top of the ridge. Far away shone the moon, sinking to a low horizon. The air was pure and strong. I descended a little way, found it warmer, and sat down to wait the dawn. The moon went below, and the world again was dark. Chapter 11. The Evil Wood. I fell fast asleep, and when I woke the sun was rising. I went to the top again and looked back. The hollow I had crossed in the moonlight lay without sign of life. Could it be that the calm expanse before me, under, swarmed with creatures of devouring greed? I turned and looked over the land through which my way must lie. It seemed a wide desert, with a patch of a different color in the distance that might be a forest. Sign of presence, human or animal, was none, smoke or dust or shadow of cultivation. Not a cloud floated in the clear heaven, no thinnest haze curtained any segment of its circling rim. I descended and set out for the imaginable forest. Something alive might be there, on this side of it could not well be anything. When I reached the plain, I found it, as far as my sight could go, of rock, here flat and channeled, there humped and pinnacled, evidently the wide bed of a vanished river, scored by innumerable water runs without a trace of moisture in them. Some of the channels bore a dry moss, and some of the rocks a few lichens almost as hard as themselves. The air, once filled with pleasant noise of water, was silent as death. It took me the whole day to reach the patch, which I found indeed a forest, but not a rudiment of brook or runnel had I crossed. Yet through the glowing noon I seemed haunted by an aural mirage, hearing so plainly the voices of many waters that I could hardly believe the opposing testimony of my eyes. The sun was approaching the horizon when I left the riverbed and entered the forest. Sunk below the treetops and sending his rays between their pillar-like boles, he revealed a world of blessed shadows waiting to receive me. I had expected a pine wood, but here were trees of many sorts, some with strong resemblances to trees I knew, others with marvelous differences from any I had ever seen. I threw myself beneath the boughs of what seemed a eucalyptus in blossom. Its flowers had a hard calyx much resembling a skull, the top of which rose like a lid to let the froth-like bloom-brain overfoam its cup. From beneath the shadow of its falchion leaves, my eyes went wandering into deep after deep of the forest. Soon, however, its doors and windows began to close, shutting up aisle and corridor and roomier glade. The night was about me, and instant and sharp the cold. Again, what a night I found it! How shall I make my readers share with me its wild ghostliness? The tree under which I lay rose high before it branched, but the boughs bent so low that they seemed ready to shut me in as I leaned against the smooth stem and let my eyes wander through the brief twilight of the vanishing forest. Presently, to my listless roving gaze, the varied outlines of the clumpy foliage began to assume or imitate, or say rather suggest, other shapes than their own. A light wind began to blow. It set the boughs of a neighboring tree rocking, and all their branches a-swing, every twig and every leaf blending its individual motion with the sway of its branch and the rock of its bough. Among its leafy shapes was a pack of wolves that struggled to break from a wizard's leash. Greyhounds would not have strained so savagely. I watched them with an interest that grew as the wind gathered force and their motions life. Another mass of foliage, larger and more compact, presented to my fancy with a group of horses' heads and forequarters projecting caparisoned from their stalls. Their necks kept moving up and down with an impatience that augmented as the growing wind broke their vertical rhythm with a wilder swaying from side to side. What heads they were! How gaunt! How strange! Several of them bare skulls, one with the skin tight to its bones. One had lost the underjaw and hung low, looking unutterably weary, but now and then hove high as if to ease the bit. Above them, at the end of a branch, floated erect the form of a woman, waving her arms in imperious gesture. The definiteness of these and other leaf masses first surprised and then discomposed me. What if they should overpower my brain with seeming reality? But the twilight became darkness, the wind ceased, every shape was shut up in the night. I fell asleep. It was still dark when I began to be aware of a far-off, confused, rushing noise, mingled with faint cries. It grew and grew until a tumult as of gathering multitudes filled the wood. On all sides at once the sounds drew nearer. The spot where I lay seemed the center of a commotion that extended throughout the forest. I scarce moved hand or foot lest I should betray my presence to hostile things. The moon at length approached the forest and came slowly into it. With her first gleam the noises increased to a deafening uproar, and I began to see dim shapes about me. As she ascended and grew brighter, the noises became yet louder and the shapes clearer. A furious battle was raging about me. Wild cries and roars of rage, shock of onset, struggle prolonged, all mingled with words articulate, surging in my ears. Curses and credos, snarls and sneers, laughter and mockery, sacred names and howls of hate came huddling in chaotic interpenetration. Skeletons and phantoms fought in maddest confusion. Swords swept through the phantoms. They only shivered. Maces crashed on the skeletons, shattering them hideously. Not one fell or ceased to fight so long as a single joint held two bones together. Bones of men and horses lay scattered and heaped. Grinding and crunching them underfoot fought the skeletons. Everywhere charged the bone-gaunt white steeds. Everywhere on foot or on wind-blown misty battle horses raged and ravened and raved the indestructible specters. Weapons and hooves clashed and crushed, while skeleton jaws and phantom throats swelled the deafening tumult with the war cry of every opinion, bad or good, that had bred strife, injustice, cruelty in any world. The holiest words went with the most hating blow. Life-distorting truths flew hurtling in the wind of javelins and bones. Every moment someone would turn against his comrade and fight more wildly than before. The truth, still his cry. One I noted who wheeled ever in a circle and smote on all sides. Wearied out, a pair would sit for a minute side by side, then rise and renew the fierce combat. None stooped for a fallen comrade or stepped wide to spare him. The moon shone till the sun rose, and all the night long I had glimpses of a woman moving at her will above the strife-tormented multitude, now on this front, now on that, one outstretched arm urging the fight, the other pressed against her side. "Ye are men! Slay one another!" she shouted. I saw her dead eyes and her dark spot, and recalled what I had seen the night before. Such was the battle of the dead, which I saw and heard as I lay under the tree. Just before sunrise, a breeze went through the forest, and a voice cried, "Let the dead bury their dead." At the word, the contending thousands dropped noiseless, and when the sun looked in, he saw never a bone, but here and there a withered branch. I rose and resumed my journey through as quiet a wood as ever grew out of the quiet earth. For the wind of the morning had ceased when the sun appeared, and the trees were silent. Not a bird sang, not a squirrel, mouse, or weasel showed itself, not a belated moth flew athwart my path. But as I went, I kept watch over myself, nor dared let my eyes rest on any forest shape. All the time I seemed to hear faint sounds of mattock and spade and hurtling bones. Any moment my eyes might open on things I would not see. Daylight prudence muttered that perhaps, to appear, 10,000 phantoms awaited only my consenting fancy. In the middle of the afternoon I came out of the wood, to find before me a second net of dry watercourses. I thought at first that I had wandered from my attempted line, and so reversed my direction, but I soon saw it was not so, and concluded presently that I had come to another branch of the same riverbed. I began at once to cross it, and was in the bottom of a wide channel when the sun set. I sat down to await the moon, and growing sleepy, stretched myself on the moss. The moment my head was down, I heard the sounds of rushing streams, all sorts of sweet watery noises. The veiled melody of the molten music sang me into a dreamless sleep, and when I woke the sun was already up and the wrinkled country widely visible. Covered with shadows it lay striped and mottled like the skin of some wild animal. As the sun rose the shadows diminished, and it seemed as if the rocks were reabsorbing the darkness that had oozed out of them during the night. Hitherto I had loved my Arab mare and my books more, I fear, than live man or woman. Now at length my soul was athirst for a human presence, and I longed even after those inhabitants of this alien world whom the raven had so vaguely described as nearest my sort. With heavy yet hoping heart, and mind haunted by a doubt whether I was going in any direction at all, I kept wearily traveling northwest and by south. And we will continue Mr. Vane's travels next time. Thank you.